Hello, everybody. Welcome. Good morning. And thanks for joining me. I'm so excited that you're all here as we're going to be having an amazing conversation this morning. So I don't know where you all are in the world, hopefully tuning in from all different parts. I'm in London and I've got two amazing guests who are also in London. So we're all here to celebrate and talk a little bit further as it's Pride Month. So first of all, happy Pride Month.
Woo!
Thank you so much for spending morning with us we're on the last day of the month almost, so we just got in there just in time. So I just wanted to also just put in a note that it could be a little bit triggering what we're talking about today, so just a little mention on that before we get into this subject. So today we're going to be talking about financial inequality. So there's many sectors, there's many ways this could be presented, this could be looked at. We could be talking about the gender pay gap, we could be looking at issues facing the BAME community, the Black, Asian, minority, ethnic community. We could be looking at age discrimination or geographical discrimination. So today, though, we really want to focus on it in relation to the LGBTQ plus community. So earlier in this month, I released a bunch of statistics on my page around financial inequality. And they really actually blew me away when I saw them there on paper and kind of digested what the statistics and numbers looked like. And we also know that there are some particularly unique challenges within the LGBTQ plus community relating to financial inequality. In particular, today, what I want us to be addressing is not necessarily what the statistics are. So we will talk about those, but I also want us to maybe kind of discuss why. So to me, that's the bit that jumped out, was why this happens. So just a little introduction on all of us. So you're like, who are these wonderful people who are going to be talking about this subject? So my name's Leah. I'm the founder of Get Comfy with Money, and my goal is to help uncap limitations and working specifically with women in business to help them achieve financial independence. So anything to do with financial inequality, I want to highlight, I want to talk about, I want to dive in and normalize. So I want us to have more conversations around money and feel more comfortable and confident talking about money. So joining me today, I have Joanne Croxford, who is a wellness and diversity specialist in the live touring industry. And I also have Dominique Avis, who is a marketing tech specialist. So they're going to help me dissect this question and understand a little bit more deeply why we think these statistics are in place, why they exist. So if I could just get a little intro from you both. So Joanne, maybe first, would you tell me a little bit, or tell everyone a bit about you and what your work is?
Sure. Leah, thank you so much for hosting this space. Dom, it's great to meet you as well in this space. So as Leah said, my name's Joanne. I work to help change the culture backstage, essentially, in live touring. And what that looks like is people come to me and say, how can we make things different? Which is really exciting, especially with conversations of late. Many people have actually stood back and realized, hang on, we've got a problem, because our spaces are largely populated by white hetero cis men, and they're just actually not reflective of the society of people who are in the audience. So, you know, we're in a time of change, and I'm certainly one of the advocates to make change happen. I'm also a queer person.
Okay. Thank you so much for sharing. And you, Dom, I'd love to hear a bit more about you and what you do.
Yeah, so I work in marketing tech, as Leah said. I also have a gender neutral clothing brand, which I discussed yesterday with Leah. And I also do talks and mentoring around the LGBTQ plus community and within my agency business.
Awesome.
That's it.
That's it.
Just that, nothing else.
So coming into the statistics that I was sharing, so some of you may have already seen these on my Instagram and on my Facebook, but I'm going to bring them up on my iPad now so we can just kind of talk them through and then delve in a bit deeper. So can you see my screen is the question I always ask.
Yes.
Yeah.
Cool. So this is what I want to highlight and talk about first. So in 2019, there was a survey, and it was conducted by YouGov in coordination with LinkedIn and LGBTQ organization Black Pride. And it was found that employees from the community taking home on average less than their straight counterparts, and that's £6,703 less. So this shortfall is the equivalent to a pay gap of 16%. So if you look at it next to the gender pay gap, that's 9.6% in the UK. So it's almost double. So this study is looking at the experiences of the transgender community as well, which the income gap against their cisgender counterparts was found to be 14% of their annual income. So we've got a pay gap of 16% and 14% across the LGBTQ community, and this is huge. Like that's a dramatic difference, and for me it's really important that we try and understand a bit more why. So I guess my first question, for anyone watching as well, if you want to input, I am on Zoom, so it's a little hard to see any comments that you have coming through, but do put them through and I'll try and answer the questions at the end. But also to you both, to Joanne and Dom, so why do you think it is? Why, in a nutshell, would you say we see these types of statistics?
Oh. I was like, who's going to go first?
Question.
I think from my end, it could be down to self-worth. So we see a lot of people of color and also like queer people not knowing what they should be asking for because they've always been othered or they've always been given less in society. So they're not coming from a place of privilege. So all they know is to fight, and they don't really want to, push the boundary or upset anyone. So it could be down to that, just not knowing what to ask for, or not even knowing what the other person's getting to compare, and not having the confidence to, go up to your colleague and be like, hey, what are you getting? What should I ask for a pay rise? Yeah, I'm going to stop talking.
I wonder on that too, because I think there's a lot of employment contracts that actually prohibit speaking about what you're earning anyway. Mm-hmm. So those conversations that would be happening are probably more peer-to-peer, would you say?
Yeah.
Even at that point of comfortability to ask what somebody else was earning.
Mm. And kind of building on that, Dom, and thank you for that point. I think there's the piece around belonging in your workplace.
Yeah.
Especially if you are, I have friends who are members of the trans community who find it really hard to be able to be in a space and have people relate to them, whether it be because of their gender identity or, simply the fact that they have different requirements in the workspace. And I think that feeling of othered, yes, it's, we are navigating a heteronormative space. And, when you don't see someone, when you don't see it, you can't be it, essentially. Yeah. And when you're in an office that's, full of people who look a certain way and you just don't look that way, so then to have the conversation, as Leah, you pointed out, is already quite challenging for people to have around money. So that extra added layer of, I actually can't penetrate this culture because I don't even understand the words that they're saying, so it's, I think it's also to do with that is, the genuine lack of feeling like you belong, or even having the opportunity to kick the door open to get into that space, which is something, I mentor a lot of young LGBT people who just, for reasons such as, their blood family have decided that they don't want to be a part of their lives anymore. So all of a sudden they've had to go out and get a really low paid job just to be able to earn, to be able to live. Mm-hmm. So it's like when you don't have the opportunities to even go into spaces where people are on a wage that's a London living wage, for instance, you have no access to that. It's like the gate is well and firmly shut in front of you. So there's a lot, certainly kind of self-worth. It all plays into this otherness that we mentioned.
Yeah, it's like you're always on survival. You're always trying to just make a living or just make the bill. You're never really actually thinking about, okay, what is everyone else doing, or what should I be on, or just not being able to build that that relationship with your co-workers, to be able to be like, okay, this is where I'm at, where are you at, where should I be at, and having that relationship with your co-workers. So yeah, I mean, I know from my experience, it's it was always like, okay, do I tell my work colleagues that I'm queer? Like, you know, everyone's talking about their boyfriend and their girlfriends, or like they're going to a wedding and they're doing this, and you're like, do I share that part of my life with you guys? Where do I sit in with that? So I get what you're saying with Joanne about the social aspects and the network at work.
And also on kind of on top of that as well is like, you know, and we've spoken about this when we met before, is, you know, having to come out every single time you even walk into a space, like whether that be to your employer or whether that be, you know, prime example, I was in the post office recently, we moved, right? My partner needed to update her license. So I said to the person behind the till, can I have a form for my partner to update their license? And the person behind the till said, well, he can just come in. And I said, well, she can't come in. So and the look on this person's face, they were like, but that's something that happens every day, you know. And I also find it, because of the way in which I present myself in the world, a lot of people assume that I want that I have a man as a partner. So I'm constantly having to almost like you say, Dom, like fight, like, no, my partner's a woman and I love her, you know. It's like it's almost like it is microaggressions, and you just think like, stop making these assumptions about who I am because of the way I look, or, you know, because of my name, because of my heritage. And I think that's a really big, it's a barrier as well.
Beautiful. So, okay, so self-worth comes into it. And so if we were to kind of summarize it, I think there's like 4 key areas. You know me, I like my key areas. So one is self-worth. So yeah, let's talk a little bit more about self-worth and how this impacts financial inequality. I mean, I know on an individual level, even just being as a woman, we already have that, we're coming from that space of lack or less than, and trying to assert our worth. I know within the workplace, I sometimes feel like if I'm going to charge more, I have to deliver more. So there's never that feeling of enough, of I am enough as I am, what I present and provide is enough. So do you think that that's amplified then within the LGBTQ plus community?
I would say definitely, especially, you know, I was having a conversation with a younger LGBT person last week, and they are definitely like a workaholic, because they don't have the acceptance from their blood parents that they would like, that would be helpful for them to feel that they're enough. They are essentially burning out, and they're very young in their career, you know. So that really breaks my heart. So when I work with young people, I always try and show them the love that they might not be getting in other places, because, you know, we live in a society that tells us, you know, that tells queer people that what we are fundamentally wrong. And that seeps in, those messages seep in, and as resilient as we can be, it still gets to you. So absolutely.
Yeah. You feel like you don't deserve more.
Yeah.
And like you said, Dom, you're just trying to cover the bills. You're just trying to, yes, it's even hard to think about more or wanting more from your life, from yourself, if you're just trying to cover the bills and get by. Yeah. So what about support networks then? We touched on this as well. So the idea of not really knowing where you can go to ask people to understand what it is that you should be charging or what your worth is. So you're not having allies to support you. Do you think that applies in work as well as outside work, or is it just specific to when you're in the workplace?
I think for me, I think it's quite hard to find allies in the workplace because, again, like, you have to come out. And then you have to find people that are willing to, like, be on your journey with you and support you at your work. Like, I started a job just before lockdown, and it was very hetero. I was the only person on my team that was queer, and I felt like I was the only person in the whole company. I probably wasn't, because like 1 in 10 people are queer, probably more now. But I literally felt like I was the only person in the whole company. And it's quite lonely. It's quite lonely. You have to listen to the straight jokes, you like pretend to laugh, even though you're like, that's not okay. Yeah, it's quite challenging. So to find someone that's on your team that's supporting you as a queer person and giving you the support that you need. Yeah, I think working environments is quite hard unless they have a very active diversity and inclusion program, which now I'm working for a company that does, that helps educate staff on diversity and inclusion, and they support allyship, and they educate people that are not necessarily aware of the problems that us queer people face. And they really promote equality across the board. And I think for me, when I chose that company to work for, those were the questions I asked. How do you support LGBTQ plus people? What is the like gender pay gap with male females? How do they support like women within the tech industry or in the business? What is the amount, like what percentage of the senior members of staff are female? And then how much of those, like what percentage are queer? And that's how I chose the company I wanted to work for.
Amazing. What a great menu. Like, right, I'll have that.
I think for me, it's like, I just got to a point where I was just sick and tired of feeling like the only person. Like I was on my own. So yeah, I think being at a company that generally openly supports the community is a massive plus. Yeah.
And you can feel that it's genuine as well.
Yeah, totally genuine.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome.
That's awesome.
So then generally, just talking about the tech industry, what's been your experience with let's say financial inequality within that space?
I think there's still a lot of work to be done because tech is generally male dominated. And then within that, you have like a massive gap. So you don't have many females in there anyway. And then if you think about queer people that are like out and out, they're probably still a bit hiding. It's not like an industry that promotes it. So I've been quite fortunate to find a company that is very supportive. But I think it's changing. Yeah, I definitely feel like a shift in the last couple of years that is slowly changing. People are becoming more aware, more supportive. I still, I'm very aware that I'm probably getting paid a lot less than my cis male counterparts. But as a female, you kind of get used to that. But there's also room to move up, not move up, but you know what I mean, like ask for more. And I'm not afraid to do that.
That's what we like to hear. Joanne, you mentioned just before as well, just like going still on the theme of support networks, of this idea that there are certain members of the community, the LGBTQ plus community, that have specific needs that can't be met or aren't met, which make certain workplaces inaccessible in the first place to even apply for. Is that something you've experienced?
So not personally, but I have had someone come to me recently to say, I'm transitioning and it's not going to work in my job. I'm never going to be able to go out. So this person's a sound tech. I'm never going to be able to do my job again because it's just not conducive to my transition. But on the flip side, I do have a friend who is a tour manager and also a backline tech, who transitioned very openly in the industry. And she is fantastic. And she's kind of become like a unicorn beacon for members of the trans community in live touring. And she shared her story very openly. And it's interesting because something that she shared openly, and she won't mind me sharing it in this space because she shared it across many webinars during this time, is before she transitioned, she never had to have a CV. But now she said she said she had to make a CV when she transitioned. And she's I think right before lockdown, she'd sent it out like 50 times and had no callbacks. She said before it was like, and that's the music industry, I'm very mindful that it is a space of nepotism. And that's one of the biggest issues. It's like, it's who you know, not what you know. And Laura says, before I transitioned, I didn't need a CV. And now people say, well, send me a CV. And she says she just never hears back from them. But she goes beyond people's expectations in that she clearly highlights that she is trans, because she doesn't want people to hire her and then they get there, then she arrives and then they're like, oh, there's a trans person on our bus. So in order for her to safeguard herself, she's very open about being a trans person. And I know for a fact she's been hired for work now as a result of all this amazing change that's been happening. She's going to have work probably for the rest of her life, which is amazing. But she made the decision actively to say in her CV, I am a trans woman, so that those conversations aren't had. Or she's also experienced people say to her, we can't have a trans person on our bus, we can have a trans woman here, because she said that to her suggests that, oh, is that because just in case one of the men fancy me? And we know, statistics suggest that members of the trans community are sadly more victims of physical violence. And it's often suggested that that's why, especially trans women of color, the murder rates are awful. And, it's often suggested it's because, there is sexual attraction, and the person who's sexually attracted to them just can't handle the fact that they might be attracted to a trans person. So it's a bit left of center of a question to answer, but I know that Lara would be very happy with me like bringing her voice into this space about that.
Beautiful. And then more directly then, so your experience, so you've got Dom from the tech space and you from the music space, which are two very kind of male-centric, male-dominated, cis male-dominated industries. So your experience within the industry when it comes to financial inequality, I'd love to hear a bit more about that.
It's huge, especially, I mean, interestingly enough, a friend of mine did some statistics recently. So tour managers seem to be paid about the same, but when it comes to like a front of house engineer putting their rates in versus like a cis man, whether that be, from a gender minority or an ethnic minority, she was saying that the statistics suggest that it's just miles different. It's miles different, and it's to the point where she was like, wow, this is really a problem. Like there needs to be some really formal education around how to ask for better rates amongst people who are from gender or ethnic minorities, because she said it is shocking. But it's interesting because tour managers who obviously sit at the kind of, I don't like to say it, but in the hierarchy of the touring community, those who sit there seem to be, the gender gap seems to be like, the pay gap seems to be pretty like non-existent, which is phenomenal. However, again, it's everyone else who's in that family that's just not being paid what they're worth.
Yeah, I wonder if that's to do, just like with my knowledge of music, there's you charge by percentage in a tour management position, don't you? So it's kind of a standard percentage, 10 to 20%. So therefore, doesn't matter your gender, you're going to be going for the same amount. Whereas if you're charging day rate, that's kind of more based on what you decide you're worth.
And also, I think it could be something around, as a tour manager, you're talking directly to the management. You're not kind of an in-between person. You have a closer proximity to the artist, and we know that the closer proximity you have to the artist, the more power you have, essentially, and you yield that power by saying what you need. And if they're not willing to pay you that, then you just don't do the job. And that's something that I've certainly experienced, is like this power dynamic of certain people, of heads of department, or there's this hierarchy that exists in live touring that's just like, it's so like toxic masculine, like it's so unhelpful and poisonous, actually. And that is my experience of the industry, is like it's full of white cis men who, we fondly call them the old boys club, but they are, because it's the old boys club who wouldn't hire anyone that didn't look like them. And, they really fight with their elbows, and it becomes a real, like a pressure cooker of toxic masculinity on the road, especially. So why would a queer person or a queer person of color want to be in that space? It doesn't make it so again, it's like so young people aren't coming through because they don't see it as an option.
Yeah.
And that's a problem. That means that to me suggests like it's not sustainable. It's unsustainable. Like it's not a sustainable space. So that's a lot of the work that we've been doing around changing that culture and making it different.
Amazing. I think as well what you were saying earlier about you can't be it if you can't see it. So if you're in that hetero-focused society or in those spaces and there are the microaggressions and there's no one that you can look up to as someone who's like you, who you could then aspire to be. Actually, do you both have, I'm interested, do you have role models in your spaces that you look up to as someone who who you feel like, oh yeah, they're the person that keeps me on track and knows that I can do this too? Oh, hard question.
Is like, well, I mean, I can say someone right off the bat is like the production manager that I work with, Keely Myers. She's queer and she's like very inclusive and she kicks some serious ass. And there's also some younger people coming into the industry that inspire me too, to know that I belong in that space. And a lot of the other tour managers and production managers that I've been working with over the last few years. There's another one called Susie Green who she tour manages Wolf Alice, Placebo, the Chemical Brothers, and PJ Harvey, and she's very inclusive in what she does. And I genuinely look to her to think, okay, I'm okay here because she's here.
Yeah. Is there some work to be done in the tech space then?
I'm still thinking.
Yeah, I think so. I think for me, it's very different. Like I don't have anyone. It sounds really sad. I look up to my colleague who is a white, cis, straight male, but he's always got my back. Like whenever I'm like, I'm not too sure about something, he'll like push me to like crack on and stuff. So he's always got my back. But no queer people that I can think of. So maybe I'm the first of many.
Maybe you are that. Sometimes there was a great quote which I'm definitely going to misquote now, but basically sometimes if you feel like you're not being inspired by someone else, it's because you are the inspiration for other people. So you are the one at the forefront.
Cool.
And the other point, which we kind of spoke a little bit about, but I'd love to talk more on, is the understanding of intersectionality within the LGBTQ community and the fact that everybody has different needs as well. So it's not just black and white in that respect. So I know we spoke last time when we were just talking about coming on this call, the idea of a white gay man is essentially like the poster, that's what you see when you think about Pride, for example.
Sponsored by Barclays. By Barclays. Yeah.
And so that's kind of become more normalized and more accepted. But there are other demographics that are definitely not being highlighted or represented.
Yeah, totally. I think that's why a lot of people are starting to boycott Pride and have our own Pride and bring it back to what it actually meant at the beginning. As a protest for equality, rather than a commercial driver to make more money out of us. They're not, these is quite often, or we know that a lot of these massive brands are, into diversity and inclusion only in June.
Yep.
And Pride is a thing, and you stick your rainbows out, and you include your minority or the LGBTQ plus community only in June. And it's very unfair because we've become, I work in marketing, and we've become a product, and it's very unfair to make money out of people that don't have money. It's very unfair. And it's not like a lot of these companies are not giving the money to charities, they're just making the money and rolling off the back of it, and it's very unfair. So I think that's why, especially this year, I'm seeing a lot of Take Back Pride events. Yeah, so in case it's underground, you got to know someone to know someone.
I like that.
No corporates allowed.
No corporates, no Barclays.
Yeah,
No Barclays.
Luckily, I'm not sponsored by Barclays.
I saw a great T-shirt at Trans Pride this weekend from a collective called the Outside Project, and the Outside Project work exclusively with queer homeless people. And the T-shirt was amazing. It says something like, "We're queer, we're here, and we're not spending money." And I was like, yes, like, you know. And Dom, you make a great point there, because, you know, we are always seen as political pawns. We're always like, oh, get some, you know, some pink money into the space and make us look really cool. And, you know, just taking it back to the music industry, there are so many artists that are essentially where they are in their in their careers because of the queer community. You know, look at Kylie Minogue, prime example. And it's
Yonder Grande or whatever her name is.
Exactly. And it's often said, you know, from what I know in working with artists in a management company, it's like, if you can get the queer community to be the early adopters of this, chances are it's going to be made very corporate, and it's going to essentially be a massive hit. So it's almost like, oh, get the misfits to like it, and if they like it, they'll make it look cool, and then, like, you know, the rest of the world can buy into it, and it can become this big corporate thing. You know, Lady Gaga is another perfect example of that. And she very openly says, without queer people, she'd have no career. She's a massive ally, thank goodness. But it's still, and that's why I love what the Outside Project do, is because they are essentially looking at people. We talk about intersectionality in the community. There are a lot of young people who are made homeless when they come out. And that's a sad reality, you know, and they essentially wrap their arms around these people. And there's also a new charity whose name has escaped my mind. I don't know if either of you know of it, that helps refugees to gain accommodation because they've had to flee their home country because of you know, of coming out, essentially. So it's these people working at these intersectional places, specifically in our community, are such important people. Without them, you know, we wouldn't have the fantastic chosen family of huge support that we have for each other. And that's why it's so important to look to these charities to make sure that you're giving them money. You know, if you've got clothes at your house that you don't need anymore, don't give them to the charity shop down the road. Find a queer charity that needs them. I always seek them out. Or, you know, give them books, or, you know, if you've got food, take it to the shelter. And it's about we as queer community really supporting our queer siblings. It's so important, because Barclays don't give a crap about us. You know, they really don't. They don't care about kids that are literally chucked out of their home because of who they love. They're more concerned about the white cis man who's gay and has a lot of money. You know, they're not concerned. So, you know, when we talk about intersectionality, it's like, you know, it's important that we talk and remember how important their fight is, because that's the fight that we need to engage in.
Yeah, I mean, personally, I think we should get discount for being gay in Pride Month.
Discount on everywhere, on
everything.
I mean, anyone that's got a campaign, we get our little badge out.
I'm there. Sign me up.
We got to start cashing in.
Yes.
Just get the card machine out. So I'd love to talk a little bit more about the pandemic, just like touching on it, because the other part of what my research found was some information around the effects during the pandemic specifically as well. So there was a campaign, human rights campaign poll from 2020, which was talking about the first wave of the closures, and 17% of LGBTQ plus people lost jobs because of COVID, which was higher than 13% of the general population. So again, there was that disparity. And even furthermore, people of color within the community were more adversely affected, still at 22%. And even further, the transgender people were 125% more likely to take a cut in hours. Sorry, I missed that as well. People of color were 44% more likely to take a cut in work hours. So do you think this is an extension of everything we've been speaking about? Or is there something more that you could attribute to the pandemic and the impact?
Yeah, I think most definitely. Like going back to what Joanne said earlier with when we was talking about young people or just people coming out and their families not being able to support them, so they just take any job. So a lot of these jobs are probably like customer facing, low in paid, so hospitality, retail, low income jobs. And those were the most affected jobs within the lockdown because I mean, they were face to face work. So those were the businesses that were closed. And at the beginning of lockdown, we saw a lot of companies make redundancies, so a lot of income cuts, but obviously hour cuts. And then obviously the furlough scheme kicked in. So that doesn't actually surprise me because, I mean, people of color were the most affected income-wise in the pandemic. And then if you put on the LGBTQ plus community on top of that, and then obviously the self-worth that we spoke about, and then everything else that we spoke about this morning, yeah, it doesn't actually surprise me. Those numbers is pretty sad, but that's the reality of it. It's a survivors
having to survive through another even more difficult situation. Yeah.
But nothing to add. I thought that was so eloquently put, Dom. Exactly. Absolutely. I concur.
Yeah. So, all right. I think you've already both said a bit of this, but let's talk about how we can, what you're doing to change the narrative. I think, like, just as a summary, both of you have kind of mentioned already what you're doing within your own circle of influence to change the narrative. So Dom being the front leader within the tech industry, bringing her beautiful presence to the industry as an inspiration for other people. But no, you were, in all seriousness, you were mentioning how you asked the right questions at the start when you were going for a role to highlight what's important to you within roles. Are there any other things that you're doing to help change the narrative?
Yeah, so I often do like DMV, sorry, diversity and inclusion talks with my companies. So we have a program that pretty much everyone signs up to. I don't think there is not one person that hasn't signed up, which is great. And they do like courses, and they ask members of the community or just people in general, so anyone can talk and share their stories or their learnings like each week. So I often do talks of that, and then great feedback from my colleagues, and then one-to-one mentoring. A few people have reached out to me on LinkedIn just to get like some insight of how to approach interviews, but also how to hold themselves in that space at work. So yeah, just helping young people find their feet a lot quicker than I did.
You also mentioned your clothing brand, how your styles are gender neutral.
Yeah. So actually, I forgot about that. I always forget.
The whole side business.
Yeah. So yeah, I have a gender neutral clothing brand. It's called Don't Ask. And it basically represents like not giving a F and just being yourself and just living your authentic life. Like you don't have to dress like a girl or a boy, like clothes is clothes and everything is sustainable and yeah, zero waste. We spoke about this yesterday, so I'm not going to go too much into it. Yeah, so yeah, I'm the creator of that as well.
Awesome.
I always forget.
You always forget. Yeah, no, sometimes you need to
I'm
remind
busy.
all the things that you're both doing. There's so many things in this space. And what about you, Joanne? What are you doing to change the narrative other than trying to diversify crews and be backstage Wonder Woman?
Amazing. I should have a cape that says that on it.
Yeah.
So I also volunteer for a charity called Girls Rock London, and one of our biggest missions is to diversify music but doing it through like applied learning, through like hosting camps for young people or women to gain confidence through music. But our spaces are incredibly inclusive, and we've become the charity that's really known for that, which is such an honor and a privilege for people to say, you know, you are trans inclusive, or, you know, you're very inclusive as far as, you know, if we actually have Gendered Intelligence, the amazing charity, come to camp to talk about pronouns, for instance, and we all write our pronouns very clearly on our name badges, and we introduce ourselves with our pronouns, and then we invite people to do the same if they feel comfortable doing that. And we hold conversations about gender and about the LGBTQ community and in that space with our participants. And it's just amazing to see, you know, we had a young person come to camp 2 years ago who wasn't really sure about which pronoun they used at the beginning of the week, but by the end they were using a completely different one that they didn't even realize was them. And for me, that is like work for like God's work. Whatever God is, that's God's work, because it's showing people that they are welcome as their true authentic selves in a space. And I think that is like the best work that you can do, because I didn't have that when I was younger. So it's almost like helping to create these safe spaces for people is like a direct act of self-love for myself, because I just didn't have that opportunity when I was younger. But I definitely don't do it for that, but it's a great byproduct of helping other people. And I do all the aforementioned things. You know, if I have things at my house that need to, if I have clothes, I take it to a queer homeless shelter. If I have food, or if I know someone who's got food to spare, I'll say, you know, I point it towards these spaces, because, you know, doing our best. And I also mentor young queer people as well, doing our best to make people know that they're loved. And that was something that I went to Trans Pride on Saturday, and seeing so many young people there, I just wanted to hug them all and tell them how much I love them, because it's like, you know, it's just an amazing thing for people to know that they can be themselves and to fear nothing. That's like my biggest.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
So then that to me is the biggest takeaway from this call, of something that anyone else can do if they want to also change the narrative, is just like showing that love, being that ear, being that support, and trying to understand.
Absolutely. And empathize. I think we're never going to be able to, no two people share the same experience, but, you know, we are in a heteronormative society, you know, so it's, don't doubt someone's experience when they share it with you. That's really important. Say, well, I didn't see that. It's like, yeah, you didn't, but that person did. Don't deny someone their reality. I think that's the biggest way of being an ally.
Beautiful.
Yeah. And I think also, for me, like, I feel like I have a responsibility to share my stories so people are aware how good they have it. So I did a talk last week with it was global team, about what it is to be a queer Black female. And I had so much positive feedback, but so many people were like, oh my God, I didn't realize how hard it is for you to go on holiday. Or, you know, I'm sorry to hear that you always get misgendered when you go to the toilet or in public spaces, or, you know, I'm sorry to hear your experiences on those. So I think it's also down to us to share openly, and be brave about it, share our stories, so people that don't have those experiences can, you know, be aware of it and be like, they're actually actively thinking the next time when, hypothetically, I'm in the toilet and I have my back towards you, you don't think I'm a dude just because I'm tall and I have short hair. Or just don't shout at someone randomly because you think they belong somewhere else. Yeah, so it's for us to be able to be brave enough to share, and it's for them to be open enough to receive and make change, because we can't create change from ourselves. We need their help.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, wow. Thank you both so much for being so brave and vulnerable and open and sharing your stories too, because like you said, the more you share, the more other people gain insight and understanding. So thank you for doing that now in this talk. I really appreciate your openness and everything you've shared. The last question I have is around resources. So I asked before if there were any particular resources that you would share or recommend. So I've got a list of those, which I will put into the comments after this talk, so if anyone wants to access them, they can. But Joanne, you mentioned a few, like LGBT plus Switchboard, Gallup, the Kaleidoscope Trust, Mermaids, Gendered Intelligence, and UK Black Pride. Do you, either of you or both of you, have any last shares or anything else you'd like to say before we wrap up?
I think I'd just like to say, if you're queer and you need someone to talk to, just reach out to either of us.
Yeah.
You know, you are loved, you are valid, and we love you. That's all I would like to say.
We like hugs.
We all love hugs. And pricing as well, like just going back to worth. So if you're wanting to work on your worth and understanding more about how you can place financial worth on your worth, because the two are separate, and that's where I come in. So if you want to work more deeply on what you should be pricing yourself at to make sure you're living the life you want to, then definitely get in touch with Get Comfy with Money or with me. Awesome. Thank you so much for joining me today. And yeah, so this video is available. It'll be on Facebook. I'm going to put it up on Instagram as well. So if you want to share it, please do. Add any of the resources that we haven't spoken about that you think would be useful to the chat. And I will see you very soon.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thanks very much. Take care. Bye.
Bye.